We're going to find the inverse of this 3 by 3 matrix in two ways using the TI-84. The first way is just using the function, the inverse function on the calculator. So I'm using this answer key to call up the matrix that I just made and putting the little inverse key on it, and that'll give you the inverse of the matrix. If you want to find the inverse of the matrix using row operations, you have to go in and edit the matrix. So this is matrix A that we're going to find the inverse of. So go in and I'm going to edit matrix A, and you're going to include 3 more columns. So I'm going to expand this out to 3 by 6. And in the final 3 columns that you just added, create the 3 by 3 identity. And you can quit and the matrix will save. So if I go in and call up that same matrix now, you'll see the original matrix plus what looks like the 3 by 3 identity on the end. And what we're going to do is we're going to do row operations on this entire 3 by 6 matrix in order to get the first 3 by 3 portion, which now is my original matrix A. We're going to make that look like the identity, and then whatever's left over here in this 3 by 3 portion will be the inverse matrix, which should match exactly with what's up here right now. So remember our row operations, we can swap any 2 rows, we can multiply any row by a non-zero number, or we could multiply a row by a non-zero constant and add it to another row. So in order to start, first step, I'm going to take this first row, multiply it by -3, and then add it to... Okay, sorry about that. So what I'm gonna do is take this row 1, multiply it by -3, and add it to row 3, so that I can get this these first 3 bottom entries to start looking like 0, 0, 1. So in order to do that, you go into matrix mode by hitting second and the inverse key. All of the operations are going to be under math. This operation right here, times row plus, is what's going to allow you to multiply by a constant and then add that row that you multiply a constant to another row all in one step. So the setup is, first number is going to be the number that you're multiplying the row by. The second entry is going to be the matrix that you're doing this operation on. You could call up the matrix A, or as we go through this, it's going to be much easier to call up the previous entry or the previous answer. So I'm just going to hit second and then the minus key to get answer. And all this command is separated by commas. So multiplying -3 by the last matrix that we called up, I'm going to do row 1 and then add it to row 3. Okay, so that's what we got. Got a 0 here, so now we're going to keep going. I'm going to add -2 times row 1 and then add it to row 2. And so that should get rid of both this 2 and this 4. Okay, so go into matrix mode, times row plus. So I'm going to multiply -2 by, and this is where I use the answer key, the last matrix that we edited, or that we had as an entry. And I'm going to multiply -2 by row 1 and then add it to row 2. Okay, so now we've got 2 zeros here, so that's kind of what I want the final row to look like, because the last row of the 3 by 3 identity is 0, 0, 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap row 2 and row 3. In order to do that, I go back into my matrix mode, to my operations, and row swap is up here, it's letter C. So the syntax for this command is to do the matrix, which is answer, the last matrix that we had as an answer, and then the 2 rows that you're going to swap. So row 2 and row 3. And here we go. Great. So this last row is looking really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, when I go ahead, I'm going to multiply row 2 by -1 first. Okay, so that's just straight up multiplying one row by a constant. So the command for that is times row. So I'm going to do times row -1. I'm multiplying -1 by this last matrix, and that in that last matrix, it's going to be row 2. So I just multiplied that second row by -1. And now what I'm going to do is multiply row 3 by -1. Okay, so it's going to be the same exact command. So because it's the same exact command, almost instead of going into the matrix mode, I'm just going to hit second and then entry, and that'll call up the command that I just typed in, and I'm going to edit it. Because I'm multiplying the last matrix by -1, I'm just changing the row. It's a little bit easier that way. So there we go. Next up, I'm going to add -3 times row 3 to row 2. So I'm going to do that times row plus command again. So I got to go in and find it. So I'm going to multiply -3 by, and then, you know, obviously the last matrix, -3 times row 3, and then add it to row 2. Okay, so now we're looking, it's looking good. Next up, I think I'm going to take -2 times this row 2, and add it to row 1. So again, if you don't want to have to filter through menus every time for reproducing commands, you can just hit second and entry and then edit the command. So I'm going to do -2, -2, and then I'm going to multiply -2 by row 2 and then add it to row 1. Okay, so we're almost there. We just got, so this is looking pretty much identical to the 3x3 matrix. We just got to deal with this last 3. So I'm going to take -3 times row 3 and then add it back to row 1. Again, just to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to hit second entry to call up the last entry I made, and I'm going to edit it this way. So I'm going to do -3, -3, and then multiply that by row 3 and add it back to row 1. And here we go. So now we're done. We made the first 3x3 part of our 3x6 matrix look like the 3x3 identity, which means this over here, these last 3 columns are the inverse to the original matrix, which, if you remember from the beginning of the video, when I call up the inverse function, this is exactly the inverse of the original matrix.